You're on the air with Florenza, your podcast destination for authentic conversations with a twist. So, grab your favorite drink, get comfy, and join me on this unique literary journey. Cheers! Elisabeth Nonas is a talented author known for her heartfelt and humorous storytelling. Her latest novel, Grace Period, explores the journey of a 70-year-old writing professor, Hannah Greene, who faces an unexpected loss of her younger wife, Grace, just as she steps into retirement. With wit and warmth, Nonas navigates Hannah's path through grief, memory, and the quest for a new beginning. Please put your hands together and welcome Elisabeth to the show. Thank you so much, Elisabeth, for joining me today on this episode of On the Air with Florenza. And before we get started talking about your book, Grace Period, as is my tradition, I would like to toast to a very successful show. And I see that you are drinking from what is that? The spirit of
It's thermos,
uh-huh.
and I'm big on stickers. So I have
Love it.
Tompkins County Public Library is for everyone.
Uh-huh.
Spirit of Tompkins, LGBT books save lives.
Nice. Now where's Tompkins?
Tompkins County, I'm in Ithaca, New York.
Oh, okay. Well, to my
Centrally
listeners,
isolated.
centrally isolated. I
Isolated.
love it. Well, to my listeners, I am drinking water. Please don't call me or text. I am fine. It's just too much celebrating for Thanksgiving. So cheers.
Cheers. I'm so happy to be here.
I am happy to have you here. We were talking before we came online, and I realized, Elisabeth, that you and I could probably talk for hours. So, so that my agent doesn't fire me, we're going to stick to a timeline. But I do hope that we have a second opportunity to talk. Tell the listeners, I read your bio and I read a little bit about your book, Grace Period, but tell the listeners about yourself and really what prompted you to write this story.
Okay. A little bit about myself and how I got to write Grace Period. So I am originally from New York City and much to my surprise ended up in Los Angeles, California, having gone to graduate film school. And I started writing scripts when I was
Uh-huh.
in Los Angeles. And I was not having terrific success. And so I kept a little notebook with stories about women. And eventually, I had written a screenplay about it was a lesbian story. It was an already there story, not a coming out story.
Uh-huh.
And that was my spec script, and that got me a lot of meetings in Los Angeles. And then I wrote a script that was a positive look at death and dying, let's say.
Uh-huh.
It was about this once close family torn apart by a secret. The mother has an illness they don't want to tell the kids. And the 16-year-old daughter finds out and confronts her parents and explores hospice. And this is in like 1979. So this
Oh.
was not a big topic
Uh-huh.
then. And so I had an already there story. I had a positive look at death and dying. And this was not getting me a lot of work
Uh-huh.
in Hollywood. And I'm sorry, this is a long way to your answer.
No, this
Um,
is great.
um, so once I had written the death and dying one, it was really, I saw these were both very personal stories for me. And it was very hard to then go back to coming up with ideas for stories that would appeal to, you know,
A
ages
larger audience.
18 to
Hmm.
30. Yeah. And so I have been keeping this notebook with scenes about women, not connected, not the same people, whatever. And I eventually turned that into my first novel.
Nice.
And that got published. And once I had done that, I basically, by then I had, well, I wrote another novel and then another novel. And by then I was pretty much out of the industry. And then I moved to Ithaca, New York,
Uh-huh.
and I had started teaching in Los Angeles, part-time teaching. And then I moved to Ithaca, New York, not for a job, but for love,
Oh.
and needed a job
Uh-huh.
and did get a job teaching screenwriting at Ithaca College.
Okay.
And I basically ended up teaching screenwriting and writing for video games and emerging media. And I did that for about 25 years.
Nice. How has the fact that you are a screenwriter improved, added to, enhanced your writing novels, or is it just giving you like a different vantage point when creating?
Um, how much time do we have? Because, like, I could talk about this forever because that's a great question. And I didn't say when I was in college, undergrad, I was an English major and I wrote poetry,
Ooh. Uh-oh.
which
The
is a
face is
lovely
like,
idea.
yeah,
It's
in
a
theory
lovely
only,
idea
people,
in
in
theory,
theory
right?
only.
Yeah. The world did not lose a great poet when when I left that. Um, but screenwriting is a lot more like poetry than prose because
Mhm.
everything has to be so condensed
Yes.
and economical. And I think that screenwriting improved I just call it prose for
Uh-huh. Yes.
just to differentiate, um, because because of that economy, that need for economy, and I think also that it really helped my dialogue.
Mm.
I found it very ironic and frustrating
Uh-huh.
that my story, Grace Period, starts out, it's all in the first person. I mean, the whole book is in the first person, but um, Hannah, the main character, her 10-year younger than her wife, has died suddenly, and Hannah is left to figure out what she's going to do with her life. She's also newly retired. She's 70, Grace was 60, and here she is. And as someone who wrote screenplays, taught screenwriting, and loves mysteries, here I am with this novel in this woman's head, in this
Uh-huh.
grieving woman's head for a certain amount of time. And I'm thinking, who's going to read? Like, come on, come on, come on, come on. What is, nothing's happening.
Uh-huh.
Something's got to happen. Um, and it was very tricky to balance that she has to be in this space for a certain
Mm-hmm.
amount of time,
Mm-hmm.
but you want people to keep reading the book. So it took a long time to get what I hope is the right balance happens.
Were there parts of the story when you were doing like your edits, your self-editing, that got cut that you were like, oh no, I really enjoyed writing that. I don't want to let that part go.
Um, oh, you mean I'm supposed to self-edit? No, I think that the things that got cut that I might have loved, the kill your darlings kind of thing,
Uh-huh.
happened in those earlier periods, so that by
Okay.
the time I got to really, really writing, and putting it all together, a lot of stuff had been cut.
In Grace Period, you explore, as we were just talking about, loss and change. What inspired you to tackle these profound life transitions? And how did you approach capturing the emotional complexity of the the storyline as well as with the characters?
That's another good question.
Thank you.
Well, I have a couple of answers.
Okay.
One, as we say, I may not be much, but I'm all I think about. And I started this book at a certain age.
Uh-huh.
I was like Hannah's 70, and well, I started it before I turned 70, but there I was.
Hmm.
And um, I've always written about how lesbians form community and family. And I'd written about lesbians debating whether or not they were going to have children and get married or be monogamous or whatever, and so like my themes kind of aged with me.
Hmm.
And it's like this is the final frontier kind of. I don't mean to sound so glib about it, but
Right. Uh-huh.
this is the age I'm at. And also, I have experienced a lot of loss in my life in terms of, I mean, um, I went through the AIDS crisis. I was living in Los Angeles. I lost a lot of close friends,
Mm-hmm.
and people that I thought we were all gonna, the plan was we're all gonna get old together.
Mm-hmm.
And here I am, and they're not. So um, that's basically how I got to write about this.
How much of Elisabeth is documented within the storyline, or were you motivated by who you are to create these fictional characters?
I want to say none and yes. um, of course, to me, Hannah is Hannah. Hannah
Mm-hmm.
is a whole other person. And I've had friends who've read the book and they go, "Oh."
Ah.
And I mean, and one friend even said, it's really hard for me at first because I just kept seeing you. And it's like, okay, I can't, I learned several novels ago, just don't engage.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like when people say, "Oh, you wrote about that party. How dare you?" And it's like, well, first of all, I didn't, you know,
It's not about
but
you.
yeah, it's not about you. And in that particular case, I really hadn't written about what she was referring to. And then there are times where people um, don't recognize themselves
Uh-huh.
in my books. So it's like I just dodge the question, which kind of like I'm dodging your
I
question.
hear you. I hear you. I got you though. As
Yeah.
as the youngest, I'm smelling what you're laying down. Um.
So and also my spouse, who is alive,
Mhm.
which she's downstairs on the telephone right now.
Uh-huh.
Um, we did have a few discussions, lively discussions, when I was writing the book, because she said, "Well, this is going to be about us," and I said, "Well, it's not." And I couldn't. And she was an editor and publisher, so I, but I didn't have her read the book until it was done, which was
Hmm.
very difficult because there were times I wanted to ask her questions, but I was afraid that if she had read it too much, I
Yeah.
couldn't get a fresh read from
Yeah.
her at the
Hmm.
end. And also, if there were going to be surprises or things,
You needed her to be fully surprised.
right,
Yeah.
right. So, and then she read it and she said, "Okay, it's not about us."
What has the response been from readers who are surprised at the age of your protagonist, in that we don't have a lot of books written about, let alone one that our main characters are queer or lesbian, or but to find someone who's 70, what has that response been?
Well, a lot of my friends who are my age cohorts, they're delighted that to see themselves here. And um, I would love to hear from more readers
Mm-hmm.
because as an author yourself, it's like, I don't know, maybe you hear from a lot of readers. I do not, and
Mm.
I would love to.
Well, we're going to put that out that they are reading to get some response going, because I think
Yeah,
the more that diversity in any form is celebrated, the more the creators are incentivized to a degree to say, no, this is, I write for me first, but I also write for the reader. And to know that if this is accepted, or desired or celebrated, then yes, others will come forward and create more.
Right. Because I hope that people will recognize themselves, and it deals with death and dying and loss, but also moving on. I think it's hopeful. And I think some of it is, well, it's not like, well, a couple of things are actually funny,
Yeah.
but there's certainly a lot of wit. So, um, I think I'm
Excellent.
pretty pleased with how it came out.
In addition to the retirement, to loss, to the relationships, to moving on, there are other aspects of the book that cover art and literature. How important was it for you to encapsulate those loves for art and for literature, but to blend it into the story that it just doesn't feel like, oh, yeah, let me throw this in? I love your thinking face.
That's a really good question. I, yeah, as a writer, it's like, I don't, what do I know? Kind of nothing. Like, what
Uh-huh.
do I do? Nothing. I mean, I write. So, at least here, Grace, was an art history professor, but she also, um, it, she was an academic, but she did sort of more interesting things. Like she was also really interested in art and video games and art as, being able to create change and
Mhm.
being political. So, I had a lot of fun with that and what she would be interested in. Um, and maybe I ex I'm actually writing a sequel, so I'm exploring that. I think we won't know until
Uh-huh.
I've written it.
Uh-huh.
Um, Exploring a little bit more of that because she also this video game stuff. She died, and Hannah has all these video game consoles, none of which she knows what to
What to
do
do
with,
with
but she
uh-huh.
does end up keeping one.
Uh-huh. And that was going to be my next question in terms of um, where does the story go from here? And but before we dive into that part, I know one of the when I was looking at the reviews and such, a word that kept coming up. You've mentioned it before, witty. Some of the reviews talked about the role that humor played in balancing the heavier themes of the book with making it to where it was equally enjoyable to read. Is humor something that comes natural to you, or did you have to tap into this whole other part of Elisabeth to develop some of the wittiness to the story?
I like to think that it comes
Uh-huh.
naturally to me. Um, when when I was in eighth grade, we had to take some aptitude test. It was just like a multiple choice. But then at the end, you had to list three things that you would want to be when you grew up. And I did not have a clue.
Uh-huh.
But I wrote down one thing, comedian.
Nice.
Yeah, well, my parents didn't find that terribly funny. So uh, that was not an avenue I pursued.
Okay. Say
But
no.
right, right.
Now you are working on a sequel, and before we came on the air, you were saying that that was not necessarily born out of something that you had considered. Tell us just quickly how that came to be.
So I wrote the book. Here's the story. Here's what happens. Yay, done. Now I'm going to write something else. And I participated in the Hobart Festival of Women Writers, which was started by Cheryl and Brina Clark and Esther Cohen in Hobart Book Village, which is in the Catskills. And it's a great event. Um, and they started an online magazine. And they asked people who had uh, done workshops at the festival to contribute something. And I wrote a short story called How to Pack a Suitcase. And finishing a novel is hard, and like saying goodbye to the characters is
Mhm.
hard. And I thought, oh, isn't this? And this was about Hannah.
Uh-huh.
It takes place shortly after the time that the book ends. And I thought, well, this is sweet because this is me saying goodbye to Hannah and like
Uh-huh.
kind of making a nice little thing. Um, and then I started maybe something else. I had some ideas I was writing, and then like a year passed, and they wanted another story for their online magazine, and I wrote something which I showed Nancy, my spouse, and she kind of went meh, like no, don't send them this.
Uh-huh.
And she says it's kind of soft. It don't. And I read it over. She was right.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I wrote something else, and it was another Hannah story.
Oh,
Yeah. So I clearly thought I was finished with her, but she had things to say
I love when our
still.
characters continue to speak to us.
Phew.
This speak. Where are the listeners able to engage with you and learn about all things Elisabeth and Hannah and other stories that you may be writing?
I have a website, elisabethnonas.com. I am on Facebook. I am on Instagram, Blue Sky, and
Mhm.
Threads, but you could find all of that from elisabethnonas.com.
Nice. Well, we've come to the part of our show that I call this or that. Actually, I call it one for the road, but it's simply this or that.
Okay.
We've come to the part of our show that I call one for the road. I ask you a couple questions that are one or the other, and you just simply say which one you connect with. Sometimes is neither, so that's an answer too. Writing in solitude or collaborating with others?
Solitude.
Solitude. Exploring new themes or revisiting familiar ones?
I would like to say exploring new themes, but I have a feeling that I just keep writing the same thing.
Right, what you're familiar with. Well, I know the answer to this one: teaching screenwriting or writing screenplays.
Oh, well, now that I have my novels, I'll say teaching screenwriting.
Nice. Last one: city life or small town charm.
At ooh, at my age, I'm from New York City.
Uh-huh.
Every time we go back, and my spouse is also from New York City, and every time we go back, because we live about a 4 hour drive into the city. Every time we go back, we say, "Why don't we live here?" And then after a few days, it's like,
When are we going
"Please,
home?
let's go home." So, how's that for equivocal and
Listen,
equivocating?
I agree. We
Equivocation?
are, yes, we are in small town ourselves, but every time we go in the city, I am like, oh my gosh, I need to live in a city. And after a couple of days, it's just like, nope, take me back.
Yeah, I do. We do go for art,
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
to for museums and galleries, and I mean that's very
It,
filling,
it
soul
is.
filling.
It is. Well, thank you so much, Elisabeth, for joining me. This has been a lot of fun.
This was great. Thank you so much, Florenza.
And this wraps up another episode of On the Air with Florenza. You may follow me on all social media platforms under Florenza Lee or via my website at florenza.org. Until next time, cheers.